There was the usual buzz in the dining room, the clinking of plastic trays, the clinking of forks, suppressed conversations, occasional laughter. But Mia Thompson heard only one thing, the silence around her. She sat against the far wall, her back to window, with a tray containing a peanut butter sandwich, a juice box, and an apple. Not because she liked it that way, but because it was the cheapest lunch on the menu. Only she hasn't even had a bite yet. Why does she always sit alone? A voice came from a neighboring table. Maybe because she doesn't have any friends. Someone laughed. Maybe because no one here wants her at all. Don't look. Don't react. Pretend you didn't hear. That rule has always worked. If you pretend you don't care, they will lose interest. Mia looked at her apple, squeezed it in her hand. She imagined it turning into a stone she could throw right into their grinning faces. And that's when they took the first step. A loud sound-aid dirty paper napkin slapped onto the table in front of her. Mia blinked, and there he was, Willie Carter, standing next to her. Tall, blonde-haired, with those very wrong blue eyes that know how to feign kindness when adults need it. "Oh, Thompson, you've got trash," he said, pushing her tray a little farther away. "Although, I classify your lunch as trash, too." "What? You don't want to say thank you." He smirked, leaning closer. "I just want to help." "You're too. You could use a little disappearing act." He snatched her sandwich. He held it up high, like a trophy. Anyone want to see what Thompson's eating? Laughter. Louder than before. Louder than all the fucking noise in the dining room. She knew what was coming next. Eva lunged forward, trying to snatch the food, but it was too late. He tossed the sandwich aside right onto the dirty tile floor. A second, and someone's foot crushed it into mush. "Oh, sorry," Willie hummed, making an innocent face. It was an accident. Mia stared at the crushed sandwich, at the crumbs scattered around, at the mocking faces around her. Everyone was waiting for her to cry or run away. She simply picked up the tray and walked toward the exit. The heat of other people's gazes felt in the back of her neck. Words flew behind her like stones. "Where are you going?" "Oh, go on, run, you pathetic coward." She doesn't even twitch like a doll. Scary, huh? A step, another step. The voices grew louder, and my ears began to ring. Eva didn't know what would happen next. But she knew one thing. She wouldn't let them see her tears. Eva walked down the hallway, clutching the straps of her backpack, the thud of her shoes echoing in the empty space between the rows of gray metal lockers. She didn't turn around, even though she knew that behind her there were still giggles, whispers, and the rustling of phone screens, which were probably already writing humiliating new messages about her. Just go to the bathroom, lock yourself in a stall, and wait it out. It was a tactic that always worked, though it seemed less and less effective each time. But her plan was so foolproof. Why was there a strange, pressing sensation growing in her chest? She rounded the corner, but before she could take 2 steps, she felt a sharp jolt in her back. Her body jerked forward, her shoulder hitting the metal locker, a sharp ringing in her ears. She managed to put her arm out to keep from falling, but the cold sensation of the hard surface only made her more angry. She turned around sharply, already knowing who she was going to see. Willie Carter stood just a few feet away, leaning lazily against a row of lockers, as if he owned this entire hallway. Next to him were his 3 buddies, the ones who always laughed the loudest when he acted out his violent scenes. "Oh, Thompson," he said with a mocking squint, shaking his head. "Did you trip? It's hard to stay on your feet when you don't fit into anything." His friends jumped with laughter. Someone even clapped him on the shoulder in support of the act. Mia looked straight into his eyes without blinking. She knew that look in Willie's eyes. He was looking for her fear and another reason to laugh. She could have said something or shoved him back. But something inside her was breaking. She took a step forward. Willie raised his eyebrows slightly, but the smirk didn't disappear. "What? You want to say something?" Mia felt her heart thudding in her chest, her fingertips trembling, her own breathing getting heavier. "You think you can do whatever you want," she said in a steady, firm voice that surprised her. "But I'll tell you one thing, Willie." He leaned a little closer, as if he hadn't heard. "Say that again. I didn't hear you." "You're, afraid." For a second, his friends' laughter subsided. Something flashed in Willie's eyes, brief, barely noticeable, but real. He blinked. Mia took a step back, then another and another. She didn't run, didn't lower her eyes, just walked away. The next day, Eva woke up feeling as if someone had poured molten lead into her chest. She heard muffled sounds on the first floor, the smell of coffee, the creak of a chair, the low voice of her father humming something to himself. Mia knew this day was going to be worse than the others, though she couldn't say exactly why. Maybe because of the way Willie had looked at her yesterday. Maybe because she hadn't given him what he'd expected. She stood up, walked to the mirror, and ran her fingers over her face. Dark circles under her eyes, tense lips. Her shoulders slumped a little as if her body was trying to make itself smaller, more invisible. She didn't want to feel it, but something inside her cracked when she saw something resembling doubt flicker in Willie's eyes. Like he'd lost control for a split second, but he'll be sure to get it back today. The corridors of the school were like a whirlpool in which you could drown if you took the wrong step. Eva was used to feeling the stares, but today was different. Today, they didn't just look, they talked. She didn't notice it right away. First it was whispers behind her back, then brief glances, then a muffled chuckle that faded as she came closer. But when she reached her locker, everything became clear. Beverly Johnson stood surrounded by 3 girls. They looked into their phones and then at each other, barely holding back smiles. "Oh, hi, Thompson," Beverly said, clutching the phone in her hand. "We were just discussing your new look." Eva didn't respond. She knew that the best way to show them that she wouldn't break was to not give a response. But then I heard a sound. Loud peak. Notification sound. She saw several people nearby pull out their phones and look at the screens. Beverly tilted her head to the side, as if studying something curious. "You should see it," she said, squinting. "You really turn out very impressive." Eva fumbled for her phone in her pocket, unlocked the screen, and a message popped up on the screen. "Psycho Thompson is out of control. Dangerous to society. Faced with tears of joy, faced with tears of joy, faced with tears of joy." There was a photo below this text. The Photoshop was crude, but enough to make her face distorted, angry, insane. Someone had enlarged her eyes, skewed her mouth, added red letters that seemed to scream in her face. "Psycho Sinclair." There have already been comments under the photo. Does she really look like that when she's angry? "Oh my God, I wouldn't trust her with my dog." Did someone see her throw herself at Willie last night? Let her go to the loony bin. That's where she belongs. Mia watched it, but couldn't bring herself to close the screen. Beverly took a step closer and, smiling, whispered, "You have such natural aggression. Maybe you should take up boxing." I could have screamed at Beverly, spit in her smirking face. But instead, she just turned around and walked away. Because she knew Willie wouldn't stop. This was war, and he had just launched his next attack. Eva sat in the stall of the school toilet, trying to breathe evenly, but each breath came with difficulty, as if her lungs were squeezed in a vice. Her phone was on her lap, the screen glowing, reflecting the bullying that was now spreading faster than a virus. She ran her finger over the comments, but they merged into one solid wall of letters, merciless as knives. "Psycho Thompson, keep her away from normal people. She's really sick. Look at her freaking out in the photo. There's only one end people like her, mental institution or prison." Her fingers trembled, and the phone almost slipped out of her hands, but she clutched it back quickly, as if she was afraid it would make things worse if she let go. She heard several girls enter the restroom. The voices were muffled, but the words reached her clearly. "She's probably sitting there," someone said mockingly. "You think she realizes it's over now?" Another voice echoed. "Poor thing, but she deserved it." The third exhaled mockingly. Bile came to her throat. Her heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to explode. She gripped the phone tighter, her nails digging into her palm, leaving painful crescents. She could come out right now. She could burst into this room, look each of them in the eye, and say everything that was building up inside. But the words were stuck somewhere deep in his chest, unable to find a way out. You always keep quiet. You let them do it over and over again. Mia squeezed her eyes shut and pressed her back into the cold wall, trying to drown out the noise in her head. When the bell rang, she left the restroom and headed for class. But the hallway seemed longer than usual. People parted, not because they respected her, but because she had become something of a living urban legend. Some looked at her sneakily, others whispered, and some smiled openly, as if they had just seen something funny. When she got to her locker, there was a note waiting inside. "We're watching you. Smile, psychopath. Winking face." Mia tore the paper, crumpled it in her fist, and closed her eyes. Eva didn't remember how the next lesson went. She sat at her desk, staring at the cracked edge of her desk, unable to hear the teacher's words or her classmates' whispers. Mayari word written under that hideous photo echoed in her head, making it impossible to focus on anything else. The teacher was saying something, his voice smooth, methodical, but she couldn't hear the meaning in his words. The words meant nothing anymore. They had lost their power because they had no meaning now. She saw someone turn toward her. Beverly Johnson's whisper something to her roommate again. Someone chuckled furtively, covering her mouth with the palm of her hand. It was all so familiar. So familiar, she didn't even try to react. "You're losing yourself. They're doing it, and you're letting them." The pen trembled in her fingers, and the ink blurred on the paper, leaving fuzzy lines that looked like a failed attempt to write something important. She wanted to disappear. When the bell rang, she quickly packed her things, trying to leave the classroom before the others. But as soon as she stepped out into the hallway, someone blocked her way. "Hey, Thompson." The familiar voice sounded lazy, like he was actually enjoying this moment. Willie Carter stood directly in front of her, arms crossed over his chest, smirking like he was sure he had her in his grasp. "Don't be so hasty. You haven't even thanked me." His voice was mocking, but there was an underlying threat in it. Mia tensed, trying to walk past him, but his hand rested on her shoulder, keeping her from leaving. "We're just kidding, Thompson." He tilted his head slightly to the side, pretending innocence. "You understand, don't you?" She didn't answer, feeling her fingers clench into fists. "What? You're out of words." He smirked, moving a little closer. The body reacted faster than the head. Her hand sharply pushed him away, harder than she'd expected. Willie staggered back, surprised, but his smirk didn't disappear. She'd seen that expression on his face before. He liked it when people were angry, because it meant he was in control of their emotions. But before he could say anything, a voice sounded behind him. "Leave her alone, Carter." Mia blinked, turning her head sharply. In front of her stood a quiet, unassuming boy from her class whom she had never really noticed. His name was Russell, and he usually sat by the window, barely speaking to the others. But now his voice sounded firm, even louder than Eva had expected. Willie turned around slowly, looking at him as if seeing him for real for the first time. "Oh, who are you anyway?" He grinned, but his voice didn't have the same confidence. "Just a man who's tired of your cheap act," Russell replied without averting his gaze. Willie said nothing. A few people in the hallway froze, watching the scene, as if they realized for the first time that they could be participants as well as spectators. Mia stared at Russell, feeling a strange, unfamiliar warmth ignite in her chest. It was the first time anyone had ever seen her. There was silence in the hallway, tense and heavy, as if the air had become thick and heavy. A few students stood still, watching the scene, and some are already hurriedly grabbing their phones to record everything that was happening. Willie stared at Russell, trying to read him, to find a weak spot to latch onto. Mia watched, too. She didn't expect anyone to say a word in her defense. "Do you really think you can meddle in other people's business?" Willie's voice sounded low, almost threatening. "It's not just her business anymore when the whole fucking hallway sees you acting like a stupid clown," he replied in a steady voice, but a hint of contempt slipped in. Mia noticed the corners of Willie's lips twitch slightly. "You know, Russell," he said, squinting at me, "I used to think you were just quiet, but it turns out you're an idiot, too." Russell slowly tilted his head to the side, as if assessing him. "And you, Carter, you're so predictable. Isn't it boring playing the same role every day?" A few voices around them buzzed. Someone whispered, "Shit, he's tweaking it." Willie stood motionless, as if deciding whether he should continue this conversation, or whether it was better to just end it here. This time he chose the latter. All right, do what you want, he said, taking a step back. Just don't whine later, Thompson. He turned and walked away, his friends following him, though a few people in the crowd continued to stare at him as if seeing him differently for the first time. When he disappeared around the corner, Mia exhaled, only now realizing that she had been holding her breath the whole time. Russell looked at her, but didn't say anything right away. Are you all right? He finally asked, and there was no pity in his voice, just simple curiosity. Why did you do that? She asked, not hiding her disbelief. Russell shrugged. Because I had to, he answered as if it were obvious. See you later, Thompson, he said, and his voice sounded like he knew something she didn't yet understand. Mia walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing on the linoleum, but she actually felt as if she were moving in complete silence. Everything going on around her, voices, calls, random glances, blended into a meaningless background. She couldn't concentrate on anything but the thought that hadn't left her since that moment. Russell intervened. He broke the routine. He broke the damned cycle where everyone was silent and she just tolerated it. But what did it even mean? Why did he do it? Mia didn't know, and it made her angrier than all Willie's words, more than the fake pictures, more than the damn notes in her locker. She was used to being hurt, to being humiliated, to being ignored, but she wasn't used to anyone sticking up for her. She pushed open the library door and stepped inside. Pushpin. The library was almost empty, a few people sitting at tables, bent over their textbooks, but no one cared about her. Eva went to the back row, to a place where she could hide among the high shelves and be alone for a while. But she wasn't alone. Russell sat at the far table, silently flipping to the pages of his notebook. Mia stopped a few paces away, watching him. Are you stalking me? She shuddered. What? Russell finally looked up, studying her with a slight sneer. You're here for a reason, he said, leaning back in his chair. So go ahead and ask. Mia felt annoyed. Ask what? Russell tilted his head to the side, just as he'd done in the hallway when he'd spoken to Willie. You want to know why I interfered, he replied. Because you looked like you were about to disappear, he said, and there was no mockery in his voice, just an even statement of fact. I wasn't going to disappear. Russell raised his eyebrows slightly. You did? What were you going to do? Russell leaned closer, folding his hands on the table. You're angry because you don't like it when someone interferes, he said calmly. You're used to being alone in this shit, and now that someone's torn your solitude apart, you don't know what to do about it. You don't know anything about me. Maybe, but I know one thing. Silence doesn't save. You think I don't know that? Russell nodded slowly. You know, but I was still hoping that if you didn't say anything, it would just sort itself out. You didn't have to do anything, she finally said, deafeningly. I know. He looked at the notebook again, pretending the conversation was over. Eva was still standing in front of him, feeling that for the first time in a long time someone was seeing her for real. But she wasn't sure if she was ready for that. Mia left the library, but the feeling of someone else's gaze still haunted her, as if Russell had left an invisible trace in her mind. His words echoed in her ears, mingling with her own thoughts that she couldn't hide from even if she wanted to. You're used to being alone in this shit, and now that someone's torn your loneliness apart, you don't know what to do about it. Why did those words irritate her so much? Why did she feel he knew more about her than he should? She turned down the hallway, about to enter the classroom, but stopped abruptly when she noticed that all eyes were on her. A few people quickly looked away, but others continued to stare, as if waiting for her to say or do something. Something was wrong. She saw someone pull out a cell phone and point the camera right at her. Her stomach clenched, her heart pounded faster, and her fingers clutched at the straps of her backpack. Have you seen it yet? A voice came from behind me. She turned around abruptly. Beverly Johnson stood in front of her, her grin glowing with false friendliness and an open-screen phone in her hand. I think you should take a look, she said, tilting her head to the side. Eva didn't want to look, but still slowly pulled out her phone and unlocked the screen. She opened the notification and saw a new message in the school chat room. Now psychotic Thompson has found her protector. Two outcasts have met, faced with tears of joy. There was a photo below the post. She and Russell are in the library. She stood in front of him. He sat at his desk, leaning forward, and there was a tension between them that now seemed obvious even in the snapshot. But that wasn't what was worse. The photo was overlaid with text. Looks like the crazies found each other. Is someone placing bets? There have already been comments under the photo. Russell decided to protect his crazy girlfriend? Faced with tears of joy. Maybe they'll have a nervous breakdown together? Word is she's got a crush on him. Nauseated face. Mia looked up at Beverly, who was watching her reaction with amusement. What? No words. She crossed her arms across her chest. Next time, choose your friends more carefully. She stepped forward and grabbed Beverly's wrist, squeezing it harder than she expected. Delete it. Beverly froze, surprised that the usually silent Eva had suddenly spoken. But then her face stretched into a smug grin. Thompson, darling, you realize there's no stopping this, don't you? Laughter behind me. Camera flashes. Other people's voices mixed into a deafening, crushing noise. Something inside her snapped. She let go of Beverly and turned around. She knew that if she stayed here even a second longer, she'd do something she'd regret later. Mia staggered away, feeling herself back in that vicious circle. Eva stood at her locker, holding a note she'd found among her textbooks. The handwriting was sloppy, sprawling, with bold letters, as if someone had written fast on purpose but wanted the message to look threatening. Your little buddy can't save you. You'll regret trying to make a difference at all. The push in the back was predictable. She steadied herself without even swaying and slowly turned around. Willie Carter was standing in front of her, smirking, but this time there was something nervous in his gaze and not so sure anymore. You think you can win? His voice was harsh, squeezed, as if he was struggling to control himself. Eva didn't answer immediately. She watched him, studying his face, his clenched fists, his tense shoulders. He looked like he didn't like where this was going. Win? She tilted her head, not averting her gaze. Was this a game? Willie squinted a little, but didn't have time to answer because a voice came from behind him. Hey, Carter! The voice was loud, confident, but it didn't belong to Russell or any teacher. Willie froze before slowly turning around. One of his own friends stepped forward. The guy who used to laugh the loudest when he acted out his violent scenes, who until now had always stood by his side, cheering him on. Did you see that? The guy turned his phone screen around, showing something. Willie frowned, snatching the phone from him and quickly running his eyes over the screen. Mia watched his face slowly change, the way his eyes widened, the way my fingers clench, so hard my knuckles turn white. It's a setup, his voice trembled. It's a fake. But the crowd around me was already buzzing. Some were whispering rapidly. Some were typing messages into their phones. And some were already whispering. Did you see what he was doing in the video? I always knew he was overdoing it. But this is too much. Who even posted this? Willie tossed the phone back, backing away a step, his gaze darting around the hallway, as if he were trying to find the source of the threat. What is it? You, he exhaled. You set it up? He stood against the wall, watching with an expression of absolute calm. I warned you, he said calmly, arms crossed. Did you think there would be no repercussions? Willie lunged forward, but Russell didn't even move. Calm down, Carter. The video's already online. You could be angry, you could deny it, but everyone saw it. The crowd around began to thicken, as if an invisible force was drawing people to the epicenter of events. The school children who had been laughing with Willie not so long ago now looked at him differently. There was no more unqualified approval in their gazes, no longer the usual admiration for his insolence. The video, which was already circulating around the school, was of him snatching a book from someone and throwing it on the floor. Him pushing a junior high student toward the lockers while his friends laugh. Him stepping on someone's backpack, throwing someone's stuff around the hallway. His own voice, his own movements, his own actions. No longer a joke, no longer an exaggeration, no longer a rumor. Now it was something everyone saw. It's a setup. His voice trailed off as he looked at the screen again. It's taken out of context. It's not true. But no one believed him anymore. Beverly Johnson stepped forward, holding the phone in her hands. She raised her head slowly, looked at it, and squinted at it as if it were the first time she'd ever really looked at it. "You know, Willie," he turned sharply toward her, but something in her face made him freeze. She wasn't smiling or smirking or pretending. She was looking at him the way she used to look at me, as someone who was now beneath her. "You were with us," he hissed, his eyes narrowing. "You laugh when I—" "Yes," she interrupted, "but I don't think it's so funny now." Those who used to support him now began to see him differently. Those who used to laugh with him were now silent. They didn't offend him. They didn't justify him. They didn't try to explain that it was just child's play. They just backed off. As the corridor began to empty, Mia still stood still, watching the world change around her. Russell stopped beside him, shoving his hands in his pockets. "You know, I thought you were going to say one last thing," he grinned, looking at her. "No need," she said. He had figured it out for himself. Russell nodded, as if acknowledging her point. "Then the question is different," he said, looking ahead. "Do you understand?" She could say that yes, that things were different now, that things would be different now, but she knew that wasn't quite true. Yes, today they saw Willie for real. Yes, today he lost his status. But school is not a fairy tale. Tomorrow things won't turn into a perfect place. Tomorrow, someone else might want to take his place. Tomorrow someone will decide again that to be strong is to be cruel. She looked at Russell, at the people around her, at the empty hallway, and felt herself wanting to move forward for the first time in a long time. Not hide. Because now the world didn't seem so hostile. Because now she knew she had a voice.